Good Friday afternoon, everyone. How are you today? I hope you're doing exceedingly well. Pastor Rob Cook is the pastor, founder, and executive director of 252 Underground, a youth ministry in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He's authored 3 books. He's a speaker, a pastor to those that proper society doesn't want. He's intimately acquainted with this group because he comes from the very streets he ministers on. Hi, I'm Patricia Durgin, the Christian Message Coach, and this is Marketers on a Mission, the live show to help Christian writers and speakers succeed online using marketing. And this is episode 85, my interview with Pastor Rob Cook from 252 Underground. Hello, Rob. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
I'm doing super fantastic. I'm so glad that you were able to be with me today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to talk to you about your 3 books, and then there's a segue between all of that writing and publishing till today. There's a span of time where things were different. And then later we'll talk about what you're going to be doing for the Christian Writers Conference, the Philadelphia Christian Writers Conference that's coming up at the end of this month. So your books, tell me about your books. I love the way that you have taken a typical word and made it modern for your ministry and your books. Can you give us some information about those 3 books?
Yeah, the first 2, Regenerate and Illuminate, that ends in 8 instead. It doesn't end in ATE, but it's 8 because they're 8-week devotionals. And Regenerate is written in a way that it builds a foundation for people, young people who may not be familiar with the gospel, or they've had wrong information, misconceived notions, things like that. And so I write to them in a way that I don't sugarcoat things. I tell it like it is, in a language that they can understand. And the second book, Illuminate, actually builds on what they learned in Regenerate and kind of expands their faith a little bit more. It's called Illuminate because I say I'm kind of flipping the light switch on so that they can start to see how the enemy works as well, and what they can do to combat that. And then the third book that came out is through Tejas Publishing, and that's called Euthanize, the Death of Traditional Youth Ministry. And that was written to the church, to youth pastors, anyone with a heart for working with youth, to teach them the ways that work, because we know statistically anywhere between 60 and 90%, depending on the survey, 60 to 90% of all young people who are raised in church leave the church when they graduate and never go back. And we've had these statistics for 20, 30 years, but we continue to do the same thing that we do that's not working for 20 to 30 years. And so what we did in our 252 Underground Youth Ministry that was very successful and had pastors coming out to visit us when our building was absolutely packed every night. They'd come out and say, "What in the world are you doing? We only have 10 or 15 or 20 kids in our youth group, and you got 200 kids crammed in here." And so we put it in a not just the story of the ministry, but also a how-to guide as well. So we combine it to the story of and a how-to guide to do what we've done through 252 Underground Youth Ministry. And so that came out last May. So those are the 3 that are currently out.
Okay. So how long have you done 252 Underground?
I started 252 Underground basically out of a necessity because I was working at a church they had their typical church youth group, and I was bringing kids off the street, and they would say, "Well, these kids smoke, or they're wearing a rock and roll t-shirt. We don't want those kids here." And so I left, close to 20 years ago. I stepped outside of that traditional church and started a parachurch organization called 252 Underground, and it just grew and grew, and here we are today. I never had any idea when we started in my living room that we'd end up having to rent a building and grow out of that after 5 years and just get to speak all over the United States about it.
Tell me, if you can, a story or two of somebody who has gone through the process, a young man or a young woman, and what their life is like now after having heard the real truth.
Well, one that definitely comes to mind is what kept me going right early on. I had a young man named Travis show up at my house when we first started the youth outreach in my house. He was 12 years old. He came out and he had lots of issues, like skin issues all over his body. I thought it was just a skin thing. And I later his mother when he was a baby all over his arms, his face and everything. And so he just connected with us in such a great way. And we're going back now. He's like 27 now, but we were able to minister with him. And he came the first week. The second week, he brought a friend with him. The third week, him and that friend Brian came again. So this is 3 weeks into a brand new ministry out of my living room. And I had these, Travis was 12, Brian was 18. And then the third week, after they came to that Friday night, on Saturday night, they showed up at my house with a young man who was 15. And I opened up the door and I was like, what are you guys doing here? I promised my wife I would only have people over on Friday night. So, and Travis, all he said was he pointed to his friend and said, this is my friend Sean. His father killed himself 2 hours ago and he found the body. And I was like, oh my gosh. I had them come in. They sat in my house. I talked to them for 2 hours, 11:30 at night. All three of them put their trust in Jesus. And I was thinking to myself, man, what if I hadn't started this? Where would these young guys go on a Saturday night after something tragic like this? And so I got to see Travis has grown so much. And it's not that he didn't go through troubles with drugs after that and everything, but now he's back on track. He's doing well. And it's just a great, I say, a trophy of God to see him. And then I have other young men that have gone through the ministry, and there's girls that have gone through it too. But what we did was took testimonies from people that have come through the ministry, and they are in the second book, Illuminate. We put them in the front of the book. One was an atheist. He said he read my book and he put his faith and trust in Jesus. And he had grown up coming to our youth ministry, and but he was wild and crazy at the time. And then we had another who was a Satanist, and he has given his testimony in the front of the book. He said that it was because of what I poured into his life through the youth ministry, and then reading the book, he has given his life to Jesus. So that's just 3 people out of the hundreds and hundreds right off the bat that I could think of, that their lives have changed because of what God has poured into them.
Pardon me. I love to hear those stories. And don't you know that Jesus is just up in heaven, smiling and waving? Proud of you and proud of those young people. What do you think is the future for
awesome.
Underground? Long term? Because you've already been doing it.
Yeah, we've been doing it a long time. And now I also pastor a church in Philly that I got the job invitation through one of the Philadelphia conference 3 years ago, and I was offered this job. And we used to have a very small building that we outgrew, and I was legally only allowed to have 40 kids in there for the fire code, but we had 200 people packing in there and then lining up down the sidewalk trying to get in. And so now I've remodeled the church that I'm at now has 2 sanctuaries. The one was 92 years old and they weren't really using it, but it was pretty, but it was run down. I spent 3 months renovating it because I used to be a contractor, kind of still am, but I renovated the whole interior, made a movie theater, a coffee bar, video games, pool table, air hockey, and it's 5,000 square feet. And so like even tonight, I'll be there tonight from 6 to 8:30 every Friday night. We have 252 underground. The kids will get a hot meal and everything. And so the future I see though is I believe that God had me start 252 underground in our house to prove to today's church that these young people are interested in God. Because back when I started, I tried to raise money to rent that building that I told you we rented after 90 days of growing out of my house. Every church I went and spoke to politely declined and said, this generation doesn't care about the things of God. And that's what they believed because of the way the generation was. And so I'm like, we're just going to have to prove that they do care about it. It's just the methods that the church is using to reach them that the kids aren't interested in.
Yes.
And so after many, many kids have come to Christ, now I know that my goal is now not just to reach the kids in my one little town, but it's to teach churches all over the United States that they can do the same thing, that they can reach those kids in their community, but they need to do it in relevant ways. And that's kind of what I see the future as of the ministry.
Do you have a program already set up, and is it online, or do you go visit, or is it consultations over the phone? How does that work? Have you got that out yet?
Can you see this?
Yes. I love that cover.
Thank you. I wrote Euthanize the Death of Traditional Youth Ministry because I'm never going to be able to go to every single church and speak to them. And so that book for I think it's $10 or $12, they can buy that. And not only is my email in there that they can contact me and we can talk and I answer questions, they can bring me out to their church and I can help them with an outreach, get their ministry set up and in the right direction, which I am totally willing and able to do. And then the book itself walks them through what we did wrong in sometimes, and things like that, and testimonies from people. And so that's the main way right now, because I'm not real tech savvy. So, right, I mean, even this was a challenge for me, Zoom. But I believe that all things are possible. So, as you know, as if there's a need for it, we will set up things online and stuff like that. But they can also, in the meantime, go on the YouTube and look up my old videos, the training videos from the show Seriously Serious that we had, and things like that. So, or they can call me personally.
And you have two websites, right? One for 252 Underground and one that's your own, but they're linked, aren't they, subject wise?
Yeah, I believe you can get to both. Yeah, once you go to Rob Cook Underground, there's a link to the 252 Underground, and then in there, if an adult or somebody's just reading about it, they can read all the main stuff. But if a kid wants to go on and just get to the stuff for them, there's a spot that says Teens Enter Here. They click on that, things like that. So
cool. That's cool. Viewers, rather, I will put the links to both of those resources above the video like I always do. So after this episode, I'll make sure and add those links. You'll be able to find them effortlessly. So, excuse me, why do you know so much about how these young people think and behave and respond? Why do you know so much? You've had some background, haven't you?
Yeah. You may find this hard to believe, but I used to be young. And my dad left when I was 7 years old, and my mom raised 4 boys on her own, and she was deaf. And so a deaf woman raising 4 boys on her own, we got into a lot of trouble. And I was arrested many, many times by the time I turned 18 because my dad didn't give financial support to my mom, and she didn't have a job because she was deaf and had medical issues and things like that. And so we really didn't have a lot of food. We got split up and had to live with different people. The police department used to bring our gifts at Christmas, used gifts. Back to nowadays, you get a new gift wrap, but these were, you got rid of your old stuff so you could get something new, and they would deliver that stuff to us, but we loved it. And the food bank would bring us our Christmas dinner, our Thanksgiving dinner, and things like that. And so from being on the streets, seeing that, and knowing that most of my troubles came because of what I was going through, when God got a hold of me officially when I was 28, I wanted to work with young people, and I started working in a church with young people. But then God just laid it on my heart to go after the people that were like me, that the church avoided, because I grew up in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, and we had 33 churches in 1.9 square miles. And the mindset of the churches back then were stay away from the Cook boys. We wore all black leather. I walked with a big hunting knife on my side, like a Rambo knife back in the 80s. And they would say, stay away from the Cook boys. They're trouble. And how am I ever going to hear the truth if everyone stays away from me? And so I'm like, man, my life would have been so different if someone would have reached out to me. So I'm like, I want to go out and reach those kids, the fringes of society, the ones that the church is afraid to reach out to because they don't know how to handle them. They don't know what to do with them. If they come into their clean, beautiful church, what's going to happen? And so I just feel that that's my calling because I lived it. I know what I went through, and I want to be there for these other kids.
It's so often that Christ allows us to go through something so that we can minister to someone else down the road. That's his normal method of operation, isn't it?
Absolutely, 100%. Everything that I went through growing up, and there's much stuff that I can't even talk about now because it would harm people that did things to me. Back then I was angry, but then when God opened the door for me to reach out to youth, it was like a light bulb went off, and I was like, God allowed me to go through everything because he was going to call me to a ministry where every one of those things is dealt with in these kids' lives. And so I honestly wouldn't change anything because it's made me who I am today.
Yes, yes. So with a background that full of flux and not a lot of stability, and through no fault of yours or your mother's, and the reputation, stay away from the Cook boys. I mean, that really explains a whole lot. You can just get a picture. Everybody can get a mental picture of what that must have been like on both sides of the equation. So was your salvation, the turnaround of your life, was that a process, or was there a turning point, a single turning point that you could point to?
Well, after my dad left, we had never known anything about God. I never even heard of God prior to 7 years old. My dad didn't take us to church. We nothing. And then after my dad left, a neighbor connected with my mother and started taking us to church. I guess I was about 8 years old, and they were taking us to church. But at the time in 1975, my dad had left my mom for another man, and so when this woman found out that my dad had left my mom for another man, she said, "Oh, you're never allowed to speak to him again, and he can't see the children." And she said, "Well, he's their father." And she said, "Well, then I can't take you to church anymore." And so we didn't go to church for a long time. And then my mom found another church and started taking us to church, and they accepted us. But when I turned 16, I told my mom, "You can't make me go to church anymore." And that's what happens a lot, you know. And once I get taller than my mom, you can't make me go to church. So I stopped going to church, even though I had that background of God, and I went to a Christian school for a couple of years because there was issues in a public school with me. And so I went to a Christian school, and I heard all about God, and I had a lot of knowledge about God, but it took that trip to get down to my heart that totally changed me. And when I was 28 years old, I hadn't been to church since I was 16. Now I was 28, and through miraculous thing with my mother and a heart attack, and I made a deal with God, and God miraculously healed my mother in 2 hours from going. The doctor said she's dying. We're flying her to another hospital, to being perfectly healthy by the time we got there. After I made the deal with God, I've been serving God since I was 28 years old. I'll be 51 on Christmas. So that's kind of how it happened. If that's a process, I would say yes. God planted the seeds in me, and then He just erupted this beanstalk kind of overnight, and here I am.
Do you still have your mom with you now?
I sure do. And literally, when she had a heart attack on her 50th birthday, me and my brothers went out to see her, and she was sitting up in bed laughing and talking, and the nurses came in and said, "Yeah, we need you to give us an hour. We want to clean her up, feed her dinner and everything." We're like, "Okay." So we left and came back an hour later. We couldn't even get within 5 feet of her room. They had machines, doctors frantic, nurses, buzzers going off. And I saw my mother laying flat on her back in there, and the doctor stopped us and said, "I'm afraid I have bad news. Your mother has hours to live. We have a helicopter on the way to fly her to a Hahnemann hospital in Philadelphia, a heart specialist hospital. You need to say goodbye." And I walked in, and my mom was laying flat on her back, white as a ghost, crying, "I don't want to die. I don't want to die." And so I quick ran out of her room and called her church, because she continued to go to church. And I called her church, and I said, "My mother, Carol Cook, is dying. Can you pray for her?" And the woman on the other end said, "Absolutely. We'll put her on the prayer chain." And I didn't know what a prayer chain was, but it sounded good to me, And so I hung up the phone, and before I left the room, I said to God, "If you let my mother live, I'll serve you the rest of my life." We went back in with my mom. They brought her out, put her in a helicopter in a blinding snowstorm. The helicopter, the second it lifted off, I couldn't even see it. Took me and my brothers 2 hours and 45 minutes to drive to the hospital, which is normally a 40-minute ride, but we were in a blizzard. When we got there, we went up to the top floor where she was at. As soon as the doors opened up from the elevator, I walked over to the nurse's station with my 3 brothers, and we said, "What room is Carol Cook in?" And the nurse said, Are you related?" And we said, "We're her sons." And she said, "Have you heard the news?" And my stomach dropped, because they said she only had hours to live, and it took us almost 3 hours to get there. And we're like, "What happened?" And she said, "We can't find anything wrong with her. All the fluid around her heart, all the fluid in her lungs is gone." We walked into the room, and my mom was sitting up in bed. "I told you not to drive down here in a snowstorm." And Mom was back, and they released her 2 days later. And that was 24 years ago. And at first I was scared, because I'm like, "Oh, now my life is ruined. I have to serve God, or He's going to kill my mother." That's honestly what I thought of God, was a judge up there waiting to zap you for everything you did wrong. And so I'm like, well, if I got to serve God, He probably wants me to read the Bible. So I was reading it out of obligation. I'm like, if I got to serve God, He probably wants me to go to church. So I started going to church with my mother. And the scriptures, I now know it's true. They will not return void. As I was reading it out of obligation, something happened inside of me, and it totally changed my life. I went to using the F word every 30 times in a sentence, and that's not an exaggeration. I was a contractor. I didn't even know that words didn't start with the letter F. Everything was the F word. And when God changed me, it was so dramatic that people in the construction business would say, "What happened to you? What's going on?" I even had one guy say, well, I can't trust a contractor who doesn't use the F word. It was like crazy, but God kind of flipped the switch and totally changed my life. And I thank him for that.
Praise God. Oh my goodness. Let me check and see if we have any comments or questions.
Okay.
On the live show. We have some likes, but we don't have comments or questions, so we'll move on. Now, you've had a lot of close shaves, and recently your family has suffered greatly through 3 deaths.
Absolutely, yes.
Can you tell us about that and how that affects your ministry, or how your ministry affected your response to that, and what it meant to your writing and so forth?
Absolutely. Well, 5.5 years ago, my brother Rick, who was 42 at the time, he was going through a divorce, and so he hanged himself. And my dad was also 42 when he died, but he died of a heart attack because of drugs, alcohol, things like that destroyed his heart. And so my dad died at 42. My brother took his own life at 42. And then on the 3rd anniversary of that, my 19-year-old son, whom we didn't realize how depressed he was over losing my brother, because we were very close. My brother worked for me in my painting and construction company from the time he was 17 till he was 42. We hung out all the time. And so my 19-year-old son hanged himself, and he survived for about 5 days in the hospital in a coma. And then 23 months to the day, my son Austin, who was 22, he died in his sleep. Because after losing my son Robbie, he started to drink and he started to smoke marijuana. And then 12 days before he died, he moved out, because I would tell him, you can't be driving and drinking and things like that. And he would drive an hour to get home from work, and he'd show up here and he couldn't even stand up. And I'm like, Austin, you're going to kill somebody. You're going to kill yourself. You're going to end up in prison. And so, I know when we tell our kids something, it doesn't sink in. And so, after he moved out, just a couple of days after moving out, he had an accident in a snowstorm while he was drinking. He totaled the truck, got out and ran. And so the cops got him. He sent me a message and said, Dad, you were right. Everything you said was right. I could have killed somebody. I don't want to waste this life I've been given. I'm only 22 years old, and so he started going to AA every single night the week before he died, clean. And people were calling me saying, you're never going to guess who I saw tonight at the AA meeting. Austin was here. And we were talking, and it was going well, and invited him over for Christmas dinner. And he was all excited about that. And I also talked to him because he had a long distance relationship. The girl was living in North Carolina. So I said, you just need to propose. You need to get married. You need to settle down. Bring her here, or you move there. And so he's like, really? Do you think I should? And I said, yeah. So he got a ring. She got an airline ticket. She was flying up here, and he was going to propose to her on Saturday. On Friday night at midnight, December 15th, he posted a video on Instagram decorating his new room with Christmas lights, and he put a little stocking on the wall for her. And he said he was excited about seeing her, but he had anxiety. He couldn't sleep because he about the pending proposal, and he had to be at work at 6:30 in the morning, and it was midnight. And so sometime after he made that video, somebody must have contacted him and said, hey, well, you just smoke a joint tonight and you'll feel better and you'll be relaxed. And whoever he got the joint from had laced it with it's called 3-methylfentanyl, 6,000 times more potent than morphine. When he smoked that joint, it shut his respiratory system down and he died. And so that was 23 months to the day, December 16th, he passed away. And so his girlfriend flew in and had come up to the airport and everything, and he had passed away. So there was never a proposal or anything.
Oh my God.
That affected me. My brother's death affected me, but it was different than children. So I continued to write. But then after Robbie died, I had a hard time writing. I would sit down at the keyboard and I felt like I was forcing it. And so I just gave up all writing for over 2 years. And then just as I started to feel like I was coming out of the fog, I get the call that my son Austin has died. And it felt like the whole process was starting all over again. But just this past Sunday, I sat down and the words flowed, and I wrote a column for Clash Entertainment and send it in. And I don't know if it'll flow again this week, but my hope and prayer is that, I can get back. I believe the enemy is trying to stop what I'm doing, discouraging me. On top of losing my children on the 8th-month anniversary, somebody attempted to rob us here at my house next to the church, stuck a shotgun in my face. It was the 8th-month anniversary of my son Robbie dying, and he was standing shoulder to shoulder with my 12-year-old son with a shotgun, threatening to kill us. And my wife ended up shooting him and saving us. It's like one attack after another from the enemy. But, losing children I used to say to people when I would stand in the hospital rooms as a pastor with them and a child was dying from leukemia, in my mind I would say, man, I can't imagine this. I could never make it. I would never get through this. And I was right. I wouldn't, because I didn't need to at the time. God didn't give me what I needed to get through losing a child, because I had my children. But when I lost my first child and my second child, God has carried us. He's been faithful, and my faith is stronger. And many people said, man, if that was me, I'd curse God. I don't understand why you still believe. And the words of Peter come to me, where else would I go? Because if I didn't have God in my life, I don't know how I would get through losing 2 children in 23 months. God is my strength, and I believe that eventually that's going to come out in my writing to help other people that have gone through what I've gone through.
Well, I was just going to ask you that. Do you feel that amongst all the other topics that you can talk about that fall under the umbrella of living in an inner city and growing up in that, and the obstacles and the challenges, and it just seems like you're never going to be able to get ahead, and yet with Christ you can. I was just going to ask you if these 3 precious deaths have broadened your ministry, your writing ministry, and that you'll be able to reach more people. Christ doesn't do things willy-nilly, so he wouldn't do anything for no good reason. I'm not suggesting that. That's not how he works.
Right.
Do you feel that is going to add a richness and another element to your already profound message, Rob?
I believe it already has. I actually have written, my son, Christian, who's 14, he has a band called Mr. Arson, and you have to spell out Mr. Arson. But they have a new album coming out in September, and I wrote 2 songs on it dealing with suicide and death. So I have that opportunity. I've written 2 other spoken word things that are going to be done by 2 different Christian rap artists. And then as far as being able to help others in ministry, 5 months to the day after Robbie hanged himself, I had to speak at a discipleship evangelism conference in Denver. And so I prepared everything because they said, this is going to be filmed, professional film. It's going to be selling DVDs, selling CDs. So you want to do good. And so I get there, and I'm the first speaker, and I'm supposed to talk about what I'm going to be keynoting on the next day. And there's about 350 people in the audience. And I'm about 5 minutes into my 20 minutes, and I feel a weight on my right shoulder. And I feel the Lord saying to me, I want you to tell him about what happened to Robbie and about how I'm getting you through it. So while I'm still talking my canned speech, I'm arguing with God, I can't do this, because it was 5 months. And every time I would talk about it, I would cry. And I'm like, I can't talk in front of these people because I'm going to cry, and it's on tape and everything. So I just kept on going. And again, the weight even felt heavier. It was like only on one side, like pushing me down. And so literally you can see the tape. I'm like, I'm sorry. I have to stop. God wants me to tell you something, and I apologize in advance. I am not going to be able to get through this. So I'm sorry, but I have to tell you. So I told what happened to Robbie, and it's I didn't even go into half of it, what happened during that week of him in the hospital and how I watched him die. But I shared everything with them, and I told them what God's been doing to get me through. To that point, there wasn't a dry eye in the house, including mine. So when I was done, I said, I don't know who that was for, but somebody needed to hear that. And then I finished my speech. The next morning, a mother and a father and their 15-year-old son came up to me, and the mother said, do you remember last night when you said that was for somebody? And I'm like, yeah. And she said, it was us. And all of them started to cry. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, 2 weeks ago, my 21-year-old son hanged himself. I had no way of knowing that. And that was just one of several incidences where that has happened. God spoke to me, and I spoke to someone, and they were actually going to kill themselves. And just miraculous things that I've gotten to see that God is using, because it's added one more asset to me. I was able to talk to people that didn't have a father. I was able to talk to people who had been molested because I went through these things. And now I can talk to people and really relate when they lose a child. And last July 4th, a woman in our church, she was at church. It was a Sunday, July 4th. The next day, right after church, she took her 2-year-old son over to a house, and he was playing ball on the sidewalk, and a van backed up and crushed him. And I sat with them in the hospital for 4 days before they pulled the plug on him. I felt like I was reliving sitting in the hospital with my son. I knew what the parents were feeling at that moment. I knew what to say, what not to say. And so God has really expanded my ministry. And suicide is an epidemic right now. Every day, every time I turn on the news, somebody's killing themselves, And it just last week, where I was at Creation Fest, my first day there, I got notified that an old friend from church, who I'm still good friends with, and his daughter used to come to our youth ministry when she was a teenager. He went home and found his wife hanging in the living room. The very next day, my wife's friend that she grew up with killed himself. So in 2 days, we lost 2 more people last week. And so I believe that God didn't want my children to commit suicide. Well, my son committed suicide. The other one died of a drug overdose. He didn't want that for them, but he has taken what the enemy meant for bad and turned it to good so that I can minister to other people. And I see that all the time.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And how do you, are you really good already at having good, healthy boundaries so that you stay healthy in these unhealthy environments as you minister? Do you swerve back and forth a little bit?
Yeah, I would have to say that. I feel, and I've been honest lately about this. I tried to hide it, but it only hurts me, and then spills into the ministry. But I've tried to wear a mask because as a pastor, everybody wants to come to you with their problems. Right after my son died, I had 3 people I had to start counseling in my church that were suicidal, and I had to be on point. And you can't break down, and you don't want to show cracks, because people, when they come to me, they want me to be the rock to make them feel better, to fix their problems. And so I feel like I've had to wear this mask of happiness when, to be perfectly honest, I'm always sad, because you can't lose 2 children and it not affect you. Every day something will pop up, a memory, a picture, or something that takes me back, and I'm sad. I'm glad for the time I had with them, but I am sad. But I can't walk around and be like that, because people need me to be strong for them. So when I'm in that, it does affect me, emotionally and physically, sometimes even spiritually, when I'm in that and I'm trying to help them and I'm thinking about what I went through and my loss and everything. And so I think, like you said, it goes back and forth. It's hard to have healthy boundaries right now where I am, because I'm in a really bad area of Philadelphia with so many people that are hurting, so many people on drugs, that I get calls that all night. People show up at my door. There's just no way to get away from it, So this weekend, on the 15th, my father-in-law rented a beach house in Ocean City, New Jersey, and invited me down for a couple of days. And so I told my wife, I said, I'm going to go for a couple of days and try to regroup before I go speak at this conference.
Good.
And things like that. So I do have those moments.
And you do take advantage of them when they come.
You better believe it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Good. Okay. Not exactly on the frame of what we have been talking about, but do you have a prayer support group, a designated prayer support group? I'm imagining the raw work that you do that you need one.
Yeah, many people pray for me. Many people send one. Every day I get devotionals from people who post them to me every single day. They'll send it to me. They'll tell me they're praying for me. And in all honesty, there's times when I can literally feel that somebody has to be praying for me, because when I want to be down, or there was times when I felt like I couldn't even get out of bed after my sons died. And then somehow I would have this strength that I couldn't explain. And then people would send me messages. I've been praying for you all week, you and your family and everything, in different states, all the way as far as Africa, that I'm friends with people on Facebook. They're sending me things. I was praying for you and your family today. God laid you on my heart. And so my strength is in the Lord 100%. I believe that.
Okay. Well, I just want to encourage you. You didn't ask me, but I want to encourage you to continue taking care of yourself. And if the enemy can take you down, he takes down all those people.
Yes, absolutely. That's why he goes for the people in a leadership position, because it's easier to wipe out 1,000 people by getting to one than to try to wipe out 1,000 individuals.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
There's a price to be paid when you are the tip of the spear, that people who are not at the tip of the spear don't have to pay. They have their own issues and challenges, but they're not exactly the same ones that the leader carries, the same responsibilities and the same burdens that the leader carries. So now let's segue to the Philadelphia Christian Writers Conference, and you're going to talk about some of these exact experiences there, aren't you? You've got a keynote and a workshop. Can you give us information about those?
Well, the keynote, Marlene, who is the founder of the Philadelphia Christian Writers Conference, she stumbled on a blog I wrote that said the freedom to do ... nothing. And in that, I talked my readers that we have so many freedoms in this country. We have the freedom to go to church in public and worship God. We have the freedom to pray whenever we want. We have the freedom to read our Bible wherever we want. But the freedom that we tend to use the most is the freedom to do nothing. People don't read their Bible. People aren't praying. People go to church if the weather's not too hot or not too cold, or it's just, there's so many things. So they don't do the things that they're supposed to do or that they should, want to do because of what Christ did for us. And so that was kind of my message, that we have the freedom to do many things, but we choose to do nothing, that we exercise the freedom to do nothing. And Marlene really liked that. And she said, is there a way that you could turn that into a keynote for my conference? And as I was thinking about it, I was like, yeah, I didn't write for 2 years. I went to the writers' conference still, even after Robbie died, and people were saying, hey, send me something, send me this, send me that. And I would say, okay. And I would get home and I would do nothing. I couldn't even tell you where their business card was that they gave me. I just wasn't doing anything. I was exercising my freedom to do nothing because I was allowing the enemy to destroy what God had been doing through me. And I think a lot of times people go to the conference and they speak to someone and they give a pitch, and an agent or an editor will say, well, after the conference, when you get home, send me the first 3 chapters. And they say, okay. And they go home and they let the enemy steal that from them. And they never send it in because they're afraid they're going to be rejected. And it's better to just think about, maybe I could be successful. Maybe I could be a writer. That's fun to hang on to that dream. But if somebody crushes that dream, that's hard. And so we do nothing. And so my hope is to go there and encourage people that to do something, anything. Just don't let the devil steal what God wants to do through you by doing nothing. And so that's the keynote. And then what I'll be teaching on is writing to reach teens, because writing to reach adults and writing to reach teens obviously is very different, but sometimes people don't think that. And so I have this little program I put together that uses superheroes and their how could you use superheroes to share the gospel. And so I give an example. I give multiple examples of stories, how you can turn that entire superhero story comic book into a gospel message. And then I throw out there, hey, Iron Man, could you give me an idea how you could use Iron Man to teach the Bible to someone? And would you know how to use Iron Man? I'm asking you.
Personally, no.
Well, you will in a second.
Okay.
Iron Man, first of all, he had a damaged heart that he tried to fix on his own, but that doesn't work too well for him in the comics. And then the second thing is, he's just a mortal man. He can be injured and everything, but then he puts on that suit of armor and he can do anything with that suit of armor. And then I go in just like you can put on the full armor of God, and I go in and teaching about that. So you set it up with something that they can relate to, and then you slip the truth right in there.
Yes.
And I do the same with the Hawk. The monster within, and he can't control it. And Paul says, I don't do the things I want to do, and what I do want to, I don't do. And and he goes back and forth, and he said this thing that struggles within him. And I tell the story of the Hawk, and then I tie that in, and I use Superman and Batman and just all different ones. And so I teach people at the conference, they don't have to use superheroes, but they can look for a message in anything and use that and make it relatable, because Jesus did that. He used parables, and he taught you from things that were grapes and wheat and corn and seeds and the things that people understood. And then he made a message about it that just drove it home. And that's how we need to reach young people today. In the same way, we have to pique their curiosity, and while they're nibbling on that, we stuff some steak in their mouth, you know what I mean, of the gospel. And so that's what I want to, show people how to do that.
That sounds like another wave of momentum, and it's part of your book for Euthanized. But do you think Euthanized is going to have a sequel? Or?
Actually, I'm working on that right now with the gentleman that I met at my mom's church that I wrote about in Euthanized. He was so great in the church, reaching kids, and had 150, 200 kids coming out to hear him. And everything he did, I sat under him and watched what he did. And so when I wrote, that's what inspired me to do 252 Underground. And so when I wrote Euthanized, there's a chapter in there about him, because the things I saw him do. And so my book, Euthanized, teaches you how to reach kids outside the church and get them in, but it doesn't go too in depth about what to do once you get them there. But my friend Jim contacted me, and now we are co-writing a book together what do you do when the kids are now in your church? They're believers now. How do you make sure that they don't walk away when they graduate? And what can you do? And so I am working on that. I'm also working on the third book in the Regenerate series. It's called Activate. It takes what you learned in Regenerate, then it was built on with Illuminate, and then what you learned in those two books, it shows you how to put that into action. That's why it's called Activate. And I am working on another book with Deshaun White, who was a famous rapper on the radio, Birdman, Cash Money Records, Lil Wayne, and God got a hold of him, and he walked out of the stadium and never went back, never even spoke to Lil Wayne in 2 years now. I mean, he just walked out. Nobody knew what happened to him. And now he's founded 323 Ministries, and he was sharing his testimony with me, and I was like, that's the most amazing thing I've ever heard. We need to make a book. And so we started on this book together, and so that's something I'm going to try to pitch when I'm at the conference. So I got lots of things. I love to write. That's the gift that God gave me, and so I'm using it. So yes, lots of projects.
I like to have
in my spare time.
I like to have a lot of things cooking myself. Keeps life interesting, doesn't it?
And that it does.
Let me see if we have any. We have 2 comments. Let's see what they are. Janice Hall Heck says, hey, Rick, hey, Patricia. And Bob Osler, of course, Chaplain Bob Osler says, can't beat it. Great interview, great guy. Love you both.
Thanks, guys. I love you guys too.
Excuse me. There's something else that I was going to ask you, and it slipped my mind, so we'll move on. Yes, that's it. Thank you, Lord. One of the things that I'm hearing you say for the books that you have in progress, and it's the same thing that Jesus does. He doesn't just give us the truth. He helps us understand how to apply that truth to our unique situation, our specific life. And I'm hearing you say practicality all along the way.
Yes.
Make the connection, serve the truth, show how it can be applied to whomever the listener or the reader is, because everybody needs it applied to theirs. Some people naturally do that, but by and large, we hear or read the Bible and hear sermons, and we understand it on a theoretical basis, but we don't know what to do with that on Monday morning when we go to work and we have a problem.
Right.
And that's one of your strengths, isn't it?
Differently. What's that? That's
one of your strengths, isn't it? To help us understand that.
Yeah, I believe that that's a gift that God gave me. I had shared with you before about how, I'd have 200 kids packed in listening to the gospel on Wednesday night in my little storefront that me and my wife paid for out of our own pocket. And churches would send a youth pastor, or their pastor would stop by and say, "What in the world are you doing?" And I said, "Well, lean in close. I have a secret for you." I'm like, Jesus did 3 things. He loved people, he met their needs, and he taught them in interesting and practical ways. And they're like, yeah. And I said, we still do those 3 things, and those 3 things still work. And that's my whole ministry that I just summed up. Those are the 3 things we do. We love people, we meet their needs, and we teach them in interesting and practical ways. That's all we do from the time I meet them to the time they're out of my sight. That's my whole goal, those 3 simple things. It's not trying to get a kid to quick say some prayer, and that's what our mistake in the church is. We were so concerned with getting someone to say the prayer, and then once they say the prayer, we move on. Well, most people that say a prayer, it never changes them. And so my goal is I want to see them change. So I spend evangelism is like, it's not something you do, it's something you live. And so I call what we do relational evangelism. We pour into people. We live out our faith to them before they even know we're Christians. And many kids have come to my youth outreach, and after a little while, they say, "Why are you doing this? How do you make any money?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, we don't make any money." And at the time, it was costing us like $5,000 a month out of our pocket. And they're like, "Well, why would you do that?" Now he's asking me, and I'm like, "Oh, this is good." And I would say, "Well, do you really want to know?" And they're like, "Yeah, why would you do this?" And I said, "Well," and I share that my testimony. I say, "This is what God did for me, and it so changed my life that I want to go back and tell everyone, and I want to see everyone have that same life." And some of the kids are like, "Oh, wow, that's crazy. There's no way you're a pastor. No church would treat us like this." And when I hear that, I feel bad, because I know that there's a lot of churches that do love them and treat and do for them, but they have this mindset that no, the church doesn't accept them, the church doesn't love them. And a lot of times we earn that because we're known more for what we stand against than who we stand for. And I tell people that Jesus called us to be fishers of men, not cleaners of fish. but we want the fish cleaned up before they come to church. And I'm like, that's never going to happen because we're not even cleaned up. We're messes too, and only the Holy Spirit cleans us up. And so our job is to be a GPS that just points to Jesus. And when we point to Jesus and they find him on their own, Jesus will do what he needs. He's been doing this a long time.
Yes.
He doesn't need our help. It says only the soil produces it, and the soil represents the Holy Spirit. And so my job is not to try to change people and fix them. My job is to love them and let Jesus change them and fix them. And that's where a lot of times churches get that wrong. Hurry up, have an outreach, get a bunch of kids in front of you, tell them that they could get run over by a tractor trailer tonight on their way home from this event. And if they do you know where you're going to go? You could burn in hell. Hurry up, just raise your hand, say this prayer, and the kids walk away. They never see him again. But then we tell our board of directors, we had 37 kids accept the Lord tonight. Everybody goes, yay! We have 37 kids not living for the Lord, but dang it, they said a prayer. Well, my goal is not to have a bunch of people just say a prayer. My goal is to see people live differently tomorrow for having met me and heard my message today. That's my whole goal of everything I do.
Amen. Amen. I might have to get my handkerchief out here in just a minute if we keep talking.
Okay.
And I don't say that lightly. I don't say that lightly. I'm sincere. I have so enjoyed talking to you and learning about your books and your upcoming projects. You've got a lot of things on the front burner all at the same time. The keynote and the workshop you're going to be delivering at the Philadelphia Christian Writers Conference at the end of this month. You have a busy life, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
And you like it that way?
But exciting. I do, yeah. Because I want to be about my Father's business. And when you read, Jesus was always doing something. And every time he would try to get away, the crowds would run there. And you know what? He would still talk to them and minister to them. Anyway, they couldn't even sneak into a field and get some grain without people running after them. And so I always tell people, I'll sleep when I'm dead, because eternity is a long time to take a dirt nap, right? So I'll just rest when I get to heaven for the first 1,000 years, and then I'll get up, clean my house or something. But right now I'm just excited. I hooked up with a gentleman who's a Christian rapper. His name is Jordan Copus, and he has the same heart for young people. And so we had posters designed. And his CD is called Unlikely because God uses the unlikely. And that's what I go after, the unlikely. And my Regenerate book, so we call it the Unlikely Regenerated Tour. And we're trying to get booked into churches where we'll come. My son's band will come. Jordan will perform. I will speak. Jordan will speak. And we reach out to your young people, the leaders and things like that. And so we're hoping to get that underway to just show up and help churches, get their youth on fire and help them, show them how to reach the kids in their community. So we'll show up a day or two early in your community. We'll go out there to the basketball courts, the skateboard parks. We'll reach out to the kids because Jordan was a professional basketball player. And so we'll show them some stuff and then say, hey, come on out to this local church. We're having a concert tonight or tomorrow and things like that. And so that's our hope, is to really ignite fires and equip churches to reach the young people in their community, because the next generation needs Jesus, or else the church dies when we die. If there's no one else to carry it on, it's over. And we overlook that so often,
Is there a website with that information on there yet, or is that something in the future, near future?
Well, we don't have a website up yet, but they can contact me if you give them my email. People are emailing me about setting that up. And then what I do is I send them some posters and all the info about it, and they can put the posters up at their church and everything like that. So right now, that's how we're doing it.
Okay. Will you come back and talk to us again another time? We want to keep up with you.
Absolutely. Anytime you want.
That would be very nice. Very nice. It's been an honor to talk to you today.
Same here. Thank you so much.
This has been episode number 85 of Marketers on a Mission, my interview with Pastor Rob Cook from 252 Underground. We're going to see you right back here on Monday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we'll do some more market training. As we also have some more interviews for other faculty members for the Philly Conference. So please do join me. I'll see you there. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.